just for clarity, when you talk about corporate capture, for those that are watching our podcast and they don't know exactly what you're getting at, can you just simplify it in a word or a sentence,
Yeah.
or
So,
try to?
yeah. I think of corporate capture as um, industry leaders of like large corporations leaving their posts, going into the regulatory bodies like the FDA or the USDA or others, changing policy, and then graduating back into the private sector, and all for the benefit of essentially their corporate masters. That's a huge problem. And I think another part of this that really speaks to us, right? Because you and I are scientists, and I came across this quote from Carrie Gillam. Okay. And if you don't know who Carrie Gillam is, she is an independent journalist who came up with the Monsanto papers. So we have like the Pentagon papers. This is the Monsanto papers. If you've never heard about this before, I haven't either. So, but I did some research on it. It's fascinating. But I think this is like the cornerstone. A lot of that information that came out in the Monsanto papers is probably what RFK Jr. took into the court system, and one of the main reasons why he ended up winning that like monumental case against Monsanto. It was a $290 million lawsuit.
Yes, yes.
And so here's a quote from Carrie that I think gets right to what you're talking about. Scientists are trying to do the work to protect the public health, but if their research interferes with the profit motives of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, those scientists can see their work limited or even censored. So that I think is what's happening. So when people say, let's just trust the scientists, they're very ethical, they're very analytical, people don't understand what's going on underneath the surface. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
Um, you know, I had some idea that something was going on along those lines, but it wasn't until I started reading RFK Jr.'s book and listening to some of his podcasts that I became more aware of the relationship between the food manufacturers and our government agencies like CDC, NIH, FDA, and also big pharma. So
yeah,
there is a very close knit financially driven relationships that concern me greatly.
yeah,
And I think it makes it extremely difficult to be able to read scientific literature and be able to discern, is this result true, or is this result somewhat fabricated because of money?
right,
And I hate to think that, but RFK talks about a law or an act that was passed in 1980, the
mm-hmm.
Bayh-Dole Act, in which that researchers could be financially remunerated. So researchers at NIH and other government agencies could be financially remunerated or rewarded for clinical trials that resulted in drugs. And I can only imagine, you just think about what the ripple effect is on that in some of the drugs that have come to market. And I can only imagine, and that's in the strictest criteria. I can only
Right.
imagine what the relationships are between the food industry and our government officials. And to me, that's absolutely 100% wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
It's so wrong. Like when I was a clinical pharmacist working at Mayo, there were many restrictions that prevented me from engaging with sales reps in certain aspects, like just me having a dinner with a sales rep
yeah,
that was not that didn't have an educational component that was sanctioned. I couldn't be there. I couldn't partake in a meal with a sales rep. And even though I'm getting information And I'm not, it's hard to sway me. I'm not that easily swayed, but those were in place for me.
Yes.
Um, but it's not in place for the people that are approving drugs and approving the foods and approving, okaying the additives that go in our foods. So
Right.
that's got to change. I don't have any extra words on that other than it's infuriating. It's like you can't
Yeah.
win. Like how am I gonna advise a patient on the best drug to take when the clinical literature might be skewed?
Yes. So let me. I'm going to address this, but I think we're going to have to be somewhat careful on how I address this because some of
Okay.
this is not going to make it on
Sorry.
YouTube and some of the
I
social
said too
platforms.
much.
But
I've said
no,
too much.
I not at all. But I do think that there are, let's say, there are certain things that the NIH pays for that drives industry and drives it right back into the pharmaceutical industry. Those same individuals at NIH will, again, sort of graduate and go into private industry, be the recipients of a lot of the work that they did at the NIH. And then the CDC ends up profiting from that. But 40% of their budget comes from a particular category of drug, shall we say, from the pharmaceutical industry. So they're
Mm-hmm.
both in they're in bed, and the profit motivations and their budgets are tied to, let me say, not necessarily coming full candor with some of the scientific literature that I have seen. I think that that's one of the problems that I see with science is that it's gotten muddled with dollars. And so that's a big issue. I totally agree with that.
So I wanted to segue into talking about something I know you're very passionate about, and I'm every time I talk to you, Brendan, I learn more about this topic, and that's the pesticides that are being used on our food in
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. And I don't want to say like I've kind of come about or did a 180 on it. I guess I
Yeah.
wasn't as educated on what's actually happening to our food in America and how pesticides are being used. Um, and we kind of had a little tangential conversation about treating our lawns and what we use on our lawns.
Yeah, right.
Um,
It's
but
everywhere.
this is right. So, but making our lawns green versus making our food healthy, those are two totally different things.
Mm,
Tell me your thoughts on some of the chemicals that are being used on our food.
yeah.
And do you think it's necessary, like, for example, to be able to produce the amount of food that we need in America? Do we need to be using these chemicals?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Boy, these are some loaded. There's a
Yeah.
lot to these questions, and they're good questions to ask. So, I would say let's start with like the number one pesticide herbicide, which was made by Monsanto. Now they're owned by Bayer, right?
I
And
think
that
so.
is
Yeah.
glyphosate or Roundup. It has many different names now, but it's basically glyphosate-based pesticides and herbicides. And so this was actually made or created and distributed back in 1974. So it's been with us for a long time, but it is now the most widely used herbicide in the world. Okay, so and I want to say there is something like 9 or 10 billion kilograms that have been produced since 1974. So that's a lot of poison, essentially, to be dropping into the environment and the atmosphere. So over, I'd say about 10 countries have banned its use, and another 15 countries are now currently looking at banning it. And these are not small countries either. And it all has to do with genetically modified foods, right? And so the way it was sold to farmers and the American public was, look, let's get on the bandwagon with genetically modified foods because it increases yield and it will enable very large farms to survive because only the small farms can like rotate crops and keep the pests down. And, keeping weeds down is very expensive. So this will lower the cost of food. And Clearly, that hasn't happened. And there's a lot of science behind that, proving that you actually get lower yields because you're destroying the microbes. And so when you get into, how does glyphosate work and what are you talking about? Well, if you look at the molecular biology of glyphosate itself, what it does is not to get too nerdy or anything, these are for the science nerds out there, it interrupts the shikimate pathway.
Yeah.
And that pathway really only exists in plants and microbes, certain microbes, but a lot of microbes, so your bacteria. So this shikimate pathway interruption keeps the plant from making some critical amino acids, and the same thing with these microbes. So you're saying, okay, fine. So they have to genetically modify the crops, soy, corn, whatever, so that they can grow, and obviously everything else gets destroyed. The weeds go away. But the microbes that are important for the benefit of the soil, for breakdown of macronutrients into micronutrients, their pathways get interrupted as well, and they die off. And what we've noticed over the last 50 or 60 years is we have essentially destroyed the topsoil in this country. Well, how did that happen? Part of it is, yes, the minerals are not being replaced, but who's replacing the minerals? The microbes were. What are we doing to the microbes? Well, we're wiping them out with herbicides. So this is the connection. Now, what does that mean for humans, us? We don't have the shikimate pathway in our bodies. So the scientists are like, well, this is a perfect solution. We'll get rid of the weeds,
Mm-hmm.
some of the negative bacteria, we'll get rid of those too, and it won't affect us. Do you think it doesn't affect us? Because lo and behold, the shikimate pathway obviously is active in the microbes that make up our own microbiota. So everyone knows now, because we're so well educated on this, like if you have digestive problems, what do? You go to a health food store and you reach for a probiotic. We're going to put some bacteria back in your stomach. Well, glyphosate is going to reduce those populations. Right? By the way, that's not the first step in getting healthy when it comes to digestive health, but that's like a whole different podcast. But at least people understand that, we're 10 to 1 bacteria to human cells, right? So if you end up destroying those microbes, that is going to negatively impact your own personal health. They get wiped out. Opportunistic pathogenic stuff ends up coming in. That leads to leaky gut into itself. Those microbes, because they're not there, aren't breaking down macronutrients into micronutrients that we recognize. A lot of vitamins and minerals, therefore, don't have that high absorption that we do. So you can go ahead and you can buy your really healthy food. It's not getting into your system. So that's number one when it comes to glyphosate. Number two when it comes to glyphosate is it travels to the liver. And get this, it interrupts a category of cytochromes called P450. And if you're not familiar with what they do, this is the process in your liver is called subtraction. So you get this macronutrient, and like part of it is toxic and part of it is totally usable. Well, if you don't have the enzyme to break that thing apart, you can't use the useful piece and you can't detoxify the toxic piece. That's what glyphosate does. It interrupts that whole pathway. So people, obviously, there's more toxins rushing into the system because glyphosate is damaging the gut lining. And then your ability to remove those toxins once they're in the system and in circulation, causing chronic inflammation, causing a lot of these chronic diseases. You have no remedy for this stuff. And so it's very interesting from that perspective. Now, I'm going to throw something out at you that probably has not been discussed much. And I ran across this, and quite honestly, I was shocked that this should be like the front line for every discussion when it comes to glyphosate and pesticides. One of the ways in which Monsanto has devised glyphosate to be an insecticide is it reduces melanin for insects. Like melanin. Oh, what is that? Oh, yeah, that's the pigmentation in our skin. You go outside, get tan, you get more melanin. Okay, yeah, I understand what melanin does. Well, in insects, melanin is hugely important for their immune system. So how does it kill an insect? It takes in glyphosate. You don't make melanin anymore. You cannot fight off the pathogens. The insect dies by pathogen overload. So what is happening with us? Melanin, I think, performs some of those same immune functions. It most certainly has an anti-inflammatory effect. What's one of the major drivers for chronic disease? Inflammation. If we have a lot of glyphosate in our diet and we're making less melanin as a result, does this have a negative impact on our overall health? I would say probably does. And so when you start going down this rabbit hole, it's fascinating what you end up finding out. So let me just read off some of this stuff here. So P450 enzymes, okay, they're involved in the activation of vitamin D3, helping to activate vitamin A, and maintaining proper bile acid. So what I run into a lot are people who have their gallbladders removed. Well, why would they have their gallbladders removed? They have their gallbladders removed because they're not really getting enough bile flowing through it to wash it clean. And that's creating a digestive enzyme issue as well. They're not getting those digestive enzymes to break down the food, right? So what's causing that? I mean, I would say one of the causes perhaps might be glyphosate. Given the fact that it's the #1 pesticide in the world, we take more of it in the States than anywhere else in the world. We have this obesity epidemic. We've got digestive problems. Lots of people are losing their gallbladders. They have liver issues. We have chronic inflammation. We have chronic disease. I think that this is the big, like, hello moment for a lot of people. So that's my take. And I'll tell you, if RFK Jr. could do anything about this, that's where I would focus on.
So just to clarify, are you for or against genetically modified crops to increase yield? Or yes? Okay.
No, definitely not. I am completely against genetically. Well, so let me step back. It's a great question. And this is more of like a scientific nerdy question than it is an ethical or moral question. Because so when it comes to genetically,
I'm sorry, but you could see the benefit of having genetically modified crops that
I can
produce a higher yield to keep food costs low.
Yes,
in theory.
Yes. Okay. However, the way we used to do it in the past is we would take a look at a series of species. Like let's take apples for instance. There's hundreds of different species of apple trees, right? Well, what we could do is we could cross an apple tree that's make basically a hybrid, okay? And we've been doing this for hundreds of years. Just ask the farmers. We could cross something that's a high yield product with something that makes a large fruit. And so you could get a high yield, large fruit and make a new species of apple that could feed a lot more people. That's the way we used to do things. Okay, you could potentially say that's genetic modification. It's not, but that's unfortunately what a lot of scientists and corporations are lumping in. Now, let's take it to the next level. What's been started up in the early 90s and has essentially taken over our entire food chain. Now what they're doing is they're splicing out that gene and putting it into our crops that resist glyphosate, and we don't know how it's getting in there. Well, I mean, we do know how. It's a viral vector. But we don't know where it's going, what things it's interrupting. And then once we consume it, where is that spliced piece of DNA that resists glyphosate? What is that doing in our system? Is that creating something? Is it not? Is it interrupting something else? Is it preventing a protein or an enzyme from being folded properly? We have no clue what's going on here. So that genetic modification, I'm absolutely against. So there's my sort of classification.
And do you think it's the glyphosate that is creating this health issue? Or I've read and heard that it's maybe not so much the glyphosate, but the chemical surfactant that allows, that's really agitating and making the glyphosate have an effect.
That's a great question. And you know what? Glyphosate.
Have you heard that?
What's that?
Have you heard that it may be the surfactant that's causing the issue and not so much the glyphosate, or maybe a combination of the both? Because glyphosate on its own isn't very effective on treating weeds, controlling weeds, but it needs a surfactant to really, really work. And the chemical surfactants Like, it's not like a regular surfactant, like dish soap. Like
Right.
this is a chemical surfactant. Some of the data that has come out suggests it could be the surfactant, but that might be, trying to splice hairs.
Yeah, and this is where things get, like, from a scientific standpoint, very difficult to control. Like, we want to run the experiment. We want to make sure we
Mhm.
control certain variables. It's very
Yes.
difficult to splice those multiple components out. Glyphosate has been so heavily studied over the years, so we know from Monsanto's own scientists that we're trying to pigeonhole this, that glyphosate is carcinogenic. That's why RFK Jr. won that case. It was the Monsanto papers. Internally, they had internal documents saying, oh, yeah, this stuff is carcinogenic. They tried to kill that. And then they ghost wrote a whole bunch of papers that said it's safe and effective. So that's how it got the approval, right? So the question of whether or not it's glyphosate that's the driver, or the emulsifiers or the surfactants, it's a great question. We don't know the answer at this point. It probably is a little bit of both. I would imagine, to the degree by which one is more than the other, I'm not sure, but I can tell you, I wouldn't want to ingest either one of them. And I can show you a graph, and this is fascinating. This, I think, goes right to the core of this issue. Like, who are the individuals who suffer the most from a gastrointestinal issue? It's celiac patients. They're sort of like on the nth degree in terms of the spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we took a look, I wish there was a graph, and we're going to show you it. I wish there was a graph that showed the amount of glyphosate getting into our food system and the incidence of celiac disease. Okay. And I wish we could show this graph going up, and then maybe glyphosate dropping, and then what the impact would be on celiac. Wouldn't that be, I mean, I know correlation is not causation, but man, that would be some really damning information. Sure enough, we have that information. That study was conducted back in 2013, and we'll pop that graph up here. And you can see that from 1974 or so, when it was introduced, to about obviously 2013 or so, when this study was published, that glyphosate goes up. Glyphosate dipped for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. The incidence of celiac went down in correlation. So what I would say is, a lot of these folks that believe that they are gluten insensitive might not actually be gluten insensitive. I'm not saying that gluten is not a contributing factor. Nope. I'm sure that's a contributing factor. I know it opens up those gates in the digestive, the lumen of the digestive channel. However, I would argue that it's actually glyphosate that's driving this. And people that think they are gluten insensitive are actually glyphosate insensitive, or hypersensitive.
Hypersensitive. Yeah.
And when they head over, and I know this for a fact, at least I don't know this for a fact. I know this anecdotally because I know people who travel over to Italy. You went over to Portugal. They end up, they're gluten insensitive over here. They eat the pasta and the bread over there.
Yeah.
They're perfectly fine. So what is going on? That's, I
totally.
think, what's going on. So that's my 2 cents on the subject. And I know I'm very passionate about this, but.
Well, I love the passion, and I think we need to hear more of it. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping we see is, if RFK gets into office, I'm looking forward to some of the changes that he's going to make.
Yeah.
So to you, Brendan, if RFK Jr. were to call upon you after he gets in office and he says, look, I need your help, Brendan, I've watched all your
one
podcasts.
Irish Catholic to another.
Yeah, one Irish Catholic to another. I trust you. I've watched all your podcasts. I like you. I don't know so much about that Dr. Jason, but I like you. If he said, I'm going to give you a magic wand.
Yeah.
And you can wave it. What 3 things would you wave your magic wand at, based on what we talked about today, and fix immediately? What's going to have the greatest impact? And
great. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm gonna put that right back at you after I finish this. We'll see how well we match up.
Okay.
Um, I would say the very first thing I would go after, obviously, and you know what, this is probably already in his wheelhouse because he's already gone after Monsanto,
Okay.
is evaluating all of the herbicides and pesticides via the EPA, reevaluating them, uh, an actual third party independent scientific evaluation. That is going to knock Roundup and glyphosate right off the map. And we'll say goodbye to that. We'll say goodbye to atrazine. We're going to say goodbye to a lot of these things that are already banned in other countries. That's going to be really key. I think the other one that I would say is probably a lot what, what's his name there? Uh, Charles Eisenstein would probably recommend, which is how do we break up these large commercial agricultural companies and promote small farms again? And that probably means completely changing around the subsidies, which mostly are geared towards large companies because they're the ones lobbying, and push them
I,
right back down to the small farms.
I like it.
And let's see, what would the third one be? Taking a look at the food pyramid again, and putting grain where it belongs, which is in my book not on the pyramid at all. It's not even a small house next to that pyramid. And if folks have time to go read Grain Brain, I think it's a really good read, and I think it really accurately depicts why grains are really designed for the animals we eat, not for us in particular. And I think that's probably where I would start. What say you? Where would you go with this, Jason?
My focus, I guess, is going to be on the children, because I think we need to. I think we have an opportunity to fix that.
Yeah.
My people my age, it's too late, right? You know, but
Unfortunately,
I think we need to. No, I say that tongue in cheek, but the first thing I would do,
if they listen to the podcast and educate themselves, there's a chance for them.
there's a chance. There's a chance. Stay with us. Like and subscribe, guys. Like and subscribe. All right.
That's
So
right.
the first thing I would do if I had a magic wand is I would definitely put physical education as a requirement, and really an emphasis in schools.
Yeah.
That's number one. The number two would be putting better food. Like getting people educated on what, like at a very young age, like it's almost like bringing back home economics
Yeah.
in school again, right? So
Yep.
teach them how to cook, teach them how to pick healthy foods, and really understand what's healthy and what's not. Because if you can change behavior at that age level, then corporate has to change with it.
Yeah.
They just have to change with it.
I agree.
So that'd be like number one. And number two is just exercise. I know it sounds so simple. I would like to see like gym memberships subsidized.
That's a good one. Yeah.
I'd love to see some money going towards that,
Yep.
so that we remove that barrier. Make exercising affordable.
But only if they show up. I tell you what, these guys, they get memberships in January and forget they have them in February. But yes, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And I think that I know there's like gym membership programs that are tied back into your health insurance, and you get like, a couple $100 off the whole year if you do go to gym so many times and take surveys. But I'm talking about like real money, real subsidizing, like really subsidizing your healthcare premium if you actually are going to the gym 3 times a week.
Right. So you're saying it's not just the membership, it's your insurance premium, which is obviously a lot larger part of your overall budget.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't understand why insurance companies won't get behind that. I really don't. I do and I don't.
Yeah.
That's another podcast, but like that would reduce obesity in the beginning and toward the end. Like, and reduce obesity, we reduce these chronic diseases, we reduce our healthcare costs across the board.
And I don't know what your thoughts are on this. Obviously, you're a physician and you work in a hospital, so you'd probably be able to speak to this much better than I would. But here, I think we really have a system that is being paid based upon the number of sick people. So it's almost like the worst we do here in terms of creating health, the more money ends up funneling into the system. It's it's a perverted motivation. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
100%. Yeah. And we've got to change that. And that has to come from like policy at the top
Yeah.
on how we reimburse or how we financially reward hospitals. Like,
Yeah.
so we're rewarding hospitals for treating a disease, not preventing a disease. So if we flip that script and we put higher rewards on the front end, come into our clinic and we'll teach you how to cook. Come into our clinic, we'll teach you good foods from bad foods. You'll take a couple nutrition classes. Like,
Yeah.
these are requirements. These all should be requirements in school, like nutritional education, like learning how to handle your finances.
Yeah.
You should be learning that in middle school, all the way through high school. You should be learning how to eat properly, beginning in middle school, all the way through.
So you think RFK Jr. should take over the Department of Education as well then, I guess, huh?
Oh, gosh. Well,
whole new podcast.
We got to do something. And I think that's where we should start. But,
okay. All right.
What's that? I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. We need to flip the script on healthcare and reward people for being healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to remind the viewers, this is one in a series that we're going to do on RFK Jr. Again, like we're taking a look at how he grew up and some of the things that he said and some of his philosophies. And a lot of this is conjecture, but if Trump ends up getting into office and he puts RFK Jr. in his cabinet, some of these things could come to pass. But anyway, I really appreciate your contribution, Jason. You're an awesome co-host. Anything that so why don't you leave the viewers with some information if they want to follow up with you? Where can they find you?
Well, I'm going to be here a lot more often with you, Brendan.
Thank goodness.
But I also, I own a supplement brand called Hybrid Remedies. If you want to check that out, and you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at Hybrid Remedies and at Dr. Jason DuBois. So would love to continue the conversation there, but seriously, guys, make sure you like and subscribe to this video because we've got some really great content coming up.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And some future series on this subject and others. Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.